Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast, episode 984. This is my interview with Kai Whiting, our second interview, and we're discussing his new book, Being Better. G'day, Kai. Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you back on the show. How are you? How you been?
It's really good. I was just thinking about this, that when we last spoke, I don't think we had COVID. I think the world was completely different. So it's kind of nice to come back and everything be the same, as in like, your podcast is the same in terms of digging up truth and, teaching people about different ways of thinking. And I'm still working on Stoic projects, but the entire world has changed. So I think it's quite interesting.
I think it was about the time that COVID actually was here, because I have a strange feeling that we talked about that a little bit, and being locked up indoors and stuff.
You're right. Yeah, that's
memory.
right. Then I think we must have been talking about the fact that I was writing with Leo the last chapter of the book and reflecting on COVID. You're absolutely right. You have a better memory than me.
No, I had to look it up. But the computer is my memory.
But the world is, be as that may, the world has still changed, right? Because I think at the time when we were talking,
sure.
We were thinking as a temporary. Oh yeah, because we were talking about people taking toilet paper and stuff, weren't we? Like people being very selfish and what should you do as a Stoic? And those kind of questions seem quite frivolous in a way, because it was more like a temporary thing, but now it feels like almost, something, I guess, World War I, World War II kind of feeling of like, this could drag on quite a bit. This isn't just, how do I get by, in the next 2 weeks? It's like, how does my mind shift through this, paradigm shift? People hadn't been working at home. People are now working at home. Before, if you worked at home, people thought you were lazy. Now people think that's perfectly normal. Yeah. People thought that, learning and talking online was kind of just a podcaster kind of thing. Now it's like prevalent in universities and schools and just about everywhere, and, even history clubs and things. And so, yeah, Zoom was probably something you and I were sort of using quite a lot, but nobody else really. So, yeah, the whole world has kind of changed and at the same time stayed the same, because we're human beings after all.
It's interesting how it's, I just had a chat with a lady this morning about her book, and she calls it the new normal. What is your take on it being the new normal?
There is an element to that. I think that you can't, the genie's out in the bowl. And I've likened it before to when women started to work during the world wars and work in a formal setting. Sorry, they were always working, just unfortunately for them, informally. And, men couldn't then turn around and go, go back to the kitchen or go back to, washing people's clothes, which was quite a common thing to do. Or if you were middle class, go back to your, learning Latin and thinking about having a nice life, but don't really do much, don't really have a career option. And they could no longer say that. And I think the same thing is like, whereas we were before thinking about we have to commute, a few hours sometimes a day, or we have to live in a certain place. I think that's different now. It's like, well, why? You've trusted me. I've done the work. Why do I now have to live, for example, in downtown Sydney? Why can't I live, relative, hour and a half away in the comfort of a slightly different place? I can come into work when I have to. Do I have to come in every day, or do I have to even come every week? So I think that's that is a new normal. I mean, I don't see how that's going to go back very easily, because it just completely mind shift, right?
How do you think, because you've got a new book out that we'll get into. It's called Being Better. So it's on Amazon for everyone listening out there. I'll stick a link in the show notes too. But with this new normal and this whole digital culture and working from home, I'm fascinated to see how that plays out, because I've always sort of worked from home anyway. But a big part of my job is dealing with the public and dealing with people, and I get to do that. So I have that social interaction all the time. And I think that ability to talk to people and reflect and learn through observation and experience with one another is paramount. Do you see that as being a challenge now that this is the new norm, where we are doing Zoom calls more, we're having meetings with people more behind, our screens rather than being face to face?
I certainly think so. I've noticed that more in people who are in their teenage years. So Lee, I'm not thinking that you're particularly young, and I'm not either. But if you were, say, 14 or 15 years old, I think that would be very difficult. Yeah. Because you just don't learn the social skills through Zoom like you do when you're one-on-one. And I do know, people Friends of mine have children of that age, and it's very difficult for them because it's just not learning key, social skills. It's not just about what you can learn in terms of information passed through an audio device of some description. It is really how one interacts. What is personal space? As a teenage boy, personal space is something different to what it is when you're, a man, and you have to learn that. And sometimes you have a few teething problems, right, with that. I'm sure teenage women feel the same way. I just can't really speak for them. And they're not really getting that kind of information. They're not getting that 3D experience. And, with a lockdown on and off for 18 months, and we're talking about people who were 15. I mean, when they were 13 and a half, that really important chunk is just gone. And they're never going to get that back. And that does concern me because, yes, we can educate in terms of provide information, but there's all these nuances. There's that face-to-face thing. And although people were saying, they're always on their phones, I mean, that wasn't entirely true. I mean, of course, they were on their phones more than I was because I didn't have a phone. The phones weren't around really. But they were, out and about. They were, in the playground or in the park, and then they had a year and a half where they couldn't be. Things like, it sounds silly, but your first girlfriend or your first boyfriend, right? I think that's of fundamental importance. Wherever, I'm not saying anything, crazy. I really like you and you really like me. What does that mean?
Yeah.
And if you're stuck at home with your mum and your dad, and you don't really know what that means, and you might learn much later, or you may never learn. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of thing we're not reflecting on very much. We're talking a lot about employment, and we're talking a lot about kids not being able to go to school per se, as in terms of learning information, say maths or English, for example, in the English-speaking world. We're not talking about the social skills. I don't think you have to go to school for that. I think people can be homeschooled, but the ability to interact with one's peers and other people has been lost quite substantially.
Yeah.
And if you haven't got the right environment at home, I'm not sure how you can get that back.
No. I mean, I think what we're sort of talking about here is, yes, skills, that you can learn, quite fine. I mean, we can read, we can write, we can learn things at home. Big observation has a big part of learning. But more fundamentally, it's probably about character and personality building that we'll miss out on. And that's, brings me back to Stoicism. I think Stoicism is... And I don't know what the definition is and what it's really all about, but I feel that's what it's about, is helping us, have good morals and mindsets and character building, opportunities.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the book is called Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living. And so, yes, I fundamentally agree with you, as the Stoic framework is, that observation is key. Your knowledge comes through what you experience and how you manage that. Virtue does not exist in a vacuum. I mean, you can be courageous in your own bedroom. You can make courageous decisions, sitting on a Zoom call. Of course you can. But there's so much more that can be said and can be heard and understood when you are in in a communal setting that isn't, a 2D one, so to speak, right? We are, Stoics say we're pro-social, and our ability to reason comes through our capacity to learn when we watch others and we interact with others. And yes, there is some interaction. Of course there is for us. If there wasn't, we wouldn't be talking. But I would say you and I can have an understanding about each other, but it's harder to have a friendship. It's not impossible, but it's much more difficult because of those nuances about how you think and how you feel and how you interact. For example, body language being a really important element, and you just don't get that on the screen. I think I said once that I forget how tall people are. Because if I see you on screen, I have no idea how tall you are.
Yeah,
I know if you're fat or you're thin, but I don't know. I don't know how tall you are.
Well, even then we could obscure that too, couldn't we?
Yeah, well, that's true. Exactly, the camera light. Right?
And I think with Stoicism, like when we talk about Stoicism, reflecting and talking about certain key elements or issues, there's a part of that that's great. You can sit there and you can learn and you can be a student. But if you're not actually practicing them, is there any point of learning? And it'd be the same in this offline, this digital setting where we're learning and talking and reflecting and doing all this great stuff. But if we don't have that opportunity to put it into practice, which is through experience, and that a big part of that is the social interaction of human beings, then what is the point?
Well, Julian Annas, the Stoic contemporary philosopher of Stoicism. I'm not sure if she's actually Stoic, and I would agree with you in the sense that virtue is a practice, it's a persistent and consistent practice of character. It's like a muscle, right? There's only so much bodybuilding magazines you can read. They can be helpful, but until you pick up the weight, until you go into the gym and you lift it, it doesn't make any sense. Which is again what Epictetus says, like, don't show me your weights, show me your shoulders. Right, and that's a very Stoic understanding of the world. Like, you can tell me that you're being virtuous, you can point to all these externals, but what do your shoulders look like? What do your legs look like? Are you really running, or are you just saying that you're reading all these magazines? And of course, this learning, I mean, it's a complementary thing, and neither you nor I are saying that Stoics are saying don't read about, say, bodybuilding so you can optimize your performance. But if you're not in the gym and you want to be a bodybuilder, I would say that, yes, you're absolutely right. It doesn't make a lot of sense because you're not in the environment where you can work on your shoulders in a very optimal way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
So what's the solutions do you propose to help us tackle this, other than just getting out there and doing it more in social situations?
In terms of whilst in the pandemic or in general?
Well, just in general. I mean, if this is the new norm where I think people will automatically, for most people, will sort of naturally find their way into society and into social interactions again. I don't think we can, I think if you do sit behind screens too long and don't have that level of interaction, you will not go insane, but you'll have levels of depressions and you'll have levels of anxiety that don't feel right, and the solution will be to go out and find those interactions again.
I can give you a personal example. So I was telling you about a friend's son, and he was spending a lot of time on Fortnite, which is a video game.
Yeah, I've heard about that game.
It's a very addictive game. And I was saying to him, like, you need to do something else. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but you need this. There is more to life. And I got him into calisthenics, calisthenics is like it's kind of like bodybuilding, but without weight. So using your own body weight to do things like lift yourself up, you press ups, your pull ups, and a whole load of shapes, body shapes. And so if you can do, I said, you should do that. If you just hunched over playing the PlayStation, then your body's not going to develop in the right way. And he was like, it's not that bad. And I said, okay, touch your toes, right? Bend over and touch your toes. He couldn't do it. I said, this is, you're 14 years old. You can't touch your toes, right? So that's an example of giving somebody who's quite young a new challenge, challenge which cannot be done solely in one's room. So it kind of like, in our case, I think it's of picking up hobbies again, hobbies that do not involve inherently the computer. So that as soon as in Portugal where I am at the moment, it's still quite locked down, but I am saying to myself, you've got to get out on your bike because there's no reason why you can't cycle. You don't tend to spend a lot of time in close circles with people if you're cycling. So like finding hobbies, finding reasons to get out and experience the world, because in Stoicism, a key principle from Zeno, the founder, is live according to nature. So that is one's own nature, like your nature, Lee, my nature as people, but also the nature around you. And the problem with being in a room and attached to a screen and not really going out is you do lose contact with reality on some level, right? I can say that in terms of my sleeping patterns got worse because it didn't matter anymore if I was up at 9 and went to bed at say 11, because I had the flexibility now to sort of work around whatever time I wanted to. And then I kind of lost touch in a way with the normal sort of 9 to 5 job. And there's the good things about that. There's also bad things. One of the things that happened was I actually realized I was working more hours. So I thought I was working less hours. I was actually working more. And then I thought, well, is that what I want? It's not a bad thing, but is that what I want to encourage, particularly when we come out of the COVID pandemic? And the answer was no, because the vacuum that my friends had left because I couldn't see them, it was filled with work. It wasn't filled with fun. It wasn't filled with leisure activities. Did you find the same thing, Lee, or was you more balanced?
No, not really. And I think the point you made there is that, yes, this, adversity causes me a lot of frustration and anxiety because I'm so disciplined in my routines and that. And I think part of anyone's good life is having continual and consistent practice. And so if suddenly you can't work, 9 to 5, and that throws out your normal practices, you still have to keep those practices in some shape or form. You can't just operate on chaos. I don't think it's healthy anyway. I know artists perhaps operate that way, and there's certain people that will thrive that way. But I think for most people, if you don't have good practice in place that's consistent and regular, things will go a little bit pear-shaped and things won't feel right,
Couldn't agree. But I think my stomach would tell you that. I was thinking I was actually I was at the beach today, which is empty. It's great. And on one level, it's quite sad on another because you think, oh, it must be very difficult for the people here. But yeah, I was thinking my stomach has definitely grown because I have, again, I made sure I kept up the work. So that was a consistency. But it wasn't consistent in say, my exercise or the leisure activities or allowing my brain to sort of just relax. And that's quite difficult sometimes because, I'll have to ask you, Lee, but do you find that if you don't give yourself a mental space to think, you sometimes don't come up with very good ideas? Or how are you?
Yeah. I really have to, and I try my best to do it, and I let things go towards the weekends a little bit more, so my practices aren't as strong, but generally I really struggle if I don't have them in place. And when the COVID pandemic had happened, there was some changes. And there was a period of time where it was uncomfortable and, I just didn't feel right. And I had to get those good routines back in place. Even though everything else was changed, I could still have, I could still wake up at 5 o'clock. I didn't have to wake up later. I could still exercise when I woke up. I could still do my journaling. Things like that keep me in good order were important.
And would you say that the same has happened for your audience? Have you received emails of people saying that they're struggling in that way, or?
No, not really. No. But I would argue that there's a lot of people that don't have that in place, and I don't claim to be something special or anything like that, because it's taken me years and years. Before I started this podcast, I had no routine. I'd wake up when I felt like it or when I had to go to work. I'd exercise only when I had to or, felt like the urge to. I'd watch mindless TV. I just didn't have any practices in place.
And how do you think philosophy has changed that in you?
I don't know if philosophy's changed that. Certainly philosophy helps in many other ways. I think philosophy has helped reinforce the idea that practice is good for us. But it hasn't been the catalyst for me building my practices. No.
And what would you say was the catalyst?
There was something missing from life. There was this void where I needed to find some more fulfillment, find some more purpose, find something with a bit of deeper meaning. And I guess that's why philosophy scratches that itch, because it's so deep. You could go into it for hours, couldn't you?
Years.
Years. Well, exactly. Yeah. And I do read some philosophy, and I journal as well. And that's been a practice that has changed now. So I used to try and journal like, people out there that I listen to, they do this when they journal, they do that when they journal. So I've tried all that. And it wasn't until I tried my own thing that I really felt like that practice was now something that actually benefited me. And I think that's like any practice. Like if you go out there and you start something, whether it's exercise, let's say you just go, look, I know this is going to be good for me. I hear the successful people are going out there, they're waking up, they're doing some exercise. Great, go out there and find something. But don't be disappointed when you find something that you try and do, but you just don't like. Go out there and find something you enjoy. Like I like swimming. Like it sounds strange to some people, but I can get up early in winter and go to the pool and swim for half an hour. And that sets my day on fire. And that's the same with journaling. Like I struggled with journaling. Like I gave up for a while last year because I was just going, what's the point of all this? And then I found a little niche there that I started reflecting on my thoughts, or reflecting on a pain point, or reflecting on something philosophical more so. And that really I found joy in. And so that's now part of my journaling process, and it helps me empty my, crazy head. And certainly I think that's the idea of practice, is to continually improve your practice and continually adjusting. Don't give up, because it's easy to give up, but continue to just to amend and adjust and improve. And that is a whole life's game.
Couldn't agree more. In fact, it brings me nicely onto the point that that Leo, my co-author, and I had when we started writing Being Better, because we have a joke that self-help books typically aren't actually self-help. They kind of say what you've just said. Like, if you do exactly what I say, you'll get the same results as me.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because I say things like, "Oh, Lee, by the way, how tall are you?" Just out of interest.
183, I think.
Okay, so you're pretty tall. It's much taller than me. So we have the example if I asked you, like, Lee, how do you get the toilet paper off the top shelf, right? You say, look, you just stand in the right position, you put your arms up and you grab it, right?
Yeah.
And I go, okay, I'd follow you, and I'm much shorter than you. Like, so I'm 5'5" in the UK terms, right? So 169. If I do exactly as you tell me, I lift my arms up, I won't get that toilet paper.
No.
And in the self-help book, sometimes it's like, just believe, just believe that your arms will grow, right? I mean, really, all I need is a step ladder,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's really important what you just said, because the irony of a lot of self-help is that it tells you that you should do exactly as I do, and you'll get the same results.
Yeah.
When what you've just said is, journaling works for me in this way. If I followed, say, Kai exactly how he journaled, it wouldn't work for me because it just wouldn't help. And so we wanted to write a book which didn't tell you the answers, but gave you the questions that you could ask yourself. So at the end of each chapter, for example, we say, no, why do you think that way? Or how would you change if you believe this, how would you change your mindset? Because for example, I really dislike the expression, like, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? It's a very anti-Stoic expression, actually, because
Really?
because if I put myself in your shoes, my feet don't fit your shoes.
Yeah.
What I really need to know, Lee, if I want to help you, is how do your feet fit in your shoes? That's an actually more important question. Because if I try to imagine to be you, I'm not you. I'm just basically imagining what I think your position is or your problem is, and then how I would deal with it if I'm what I think you are.
Yeah.
So I'm either doing it literally from my own perspective, or I'm doing it from the perspective of who I think you are. So I might be like, well, Lee's a swimmer, and he's from Australia, and he's this age, and he's this tall, and therefore he thinks that. And actually, the Stoic question is, Lee, how do you feel? And what can you do? And what's your skill set? And what's your mindset? And hearing you answer your own questions, that's when you get solutions in Stoicism. It's not by following me. That's why it's a virtue ethics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So not necessarily assuming that you're in their shoes, but understanding them. Yeah. And understanding them in their shoes. Yeah.
Exactly. So in Stoicism, we talk about sympathy, right? When one lives according to nature, what happens is they start to have like sympathy with each other, and they start to harmonize with each other. It's the ability to live in harmony with oneself, harmony with one's community, and harmony with the universe. It's not about trying to be somebody else or think how they think. It's literally saying, okay, how can you and I, Lee, reason with each other? That's why we have Socratic dialogue, right? It's not about me giving you the answers or step one, do this, step two, this. It's you and I finding out together what the answer is to a given problem.
Yeah.
And that's why Stoicism is all about, dialogue, which is why podcasts are really helpful, because you can say, okay, so what does it mean when you say new normal? What does new or normal mean? And are we looking at someone my age or your age? For example, people often say, I don't know if you've noticed this, well, I know what it's like to be 21. Well, you do know what it's like to be 21 in 2001, but you don't know what it's like to be 21 now. Yeah. And so that makes me smile when people say, well, I know what it's like to be a teenager. You only know what it's like to be a teenager when you were a teenager. You don't know what it's like to be a teenager 20 years later. You have no idea. And so I find it quite interesting that we as humans tend to assume a lot of things because we think that we've gone through something similar. And the truth is we might have, and our advice might be very helpful. But I think it's only helpful if you can give it in a way that the person can use it to find their own answers. Yeah. And that's kind of what the Being Better is about, really, because it's not about doing what you think is right because it makes you look better, or following somebody else's path in order to be like them because you think that's better. It's more like, what questions can I ask myself in order to change my mindset, in order to change what you said, my practice, so that ultimately it works for me. And that is what we argue is what is being better really about.
Yeah. With the and again going back to that, the steps to self-improvement and bettering yourself, I mean, Stoicism is a bit more broadly used, and it's not that. It's not just, hey, here's what you can do to make yourself better. It's concepts, I guess, that can be applied to situations like what you've just, I guess, explained, to help anyone in any situation. Is that sort of right? Is that a good summary?
Yeah, it's to help anyone help themselves in order to
help themselves.
In order literally self. This is the definition of self-help, but that's not what self-help is. That's the irony of self-help. It's about self-help should be how can you help yourself, but really it's if you follow me, you'll help yourself. And I like the irony of that. Basically, Stoicism says yes. For example, it is about helping yourself, but the reason why you help yourself is to be a better person in society. It's not merely to help yourself. If you really think it's only about you, you've missed the point of Stoicism. And I think we said this before, but Zeno, the founder's, most famous contribution to the ancient world was the Republic. His version of the Republic. So the Republic, as the name suggests, was about what is the perfect, or that's the wrong word, what does the ideal Stoic society look like? He wasn't interested in what the ideal Stoic individual looked like. He talked about the community of sages, right? So he talks about the fact that in the community of sages, there's no money, there's no private property, because everybody has takes only what they need and works together with all the others through this dialogue like we're having now to work at how best to construct a society where everyone flourishes. And that's the really strange thing for me about life hack Stoicism, or what we call in Silicon Valley Stoicism, right? Where it talks about how to get promotion, how to do a push-up in the gym or 100 push-ups in the gym. It's like, no, Stoicism is about having a calmer mind, but it's the reason why you have a calmer mind is that you are more proactive in society. You actually can give more to society because you know who you are. You're not worried about trivial matters. You have headspace to do what is right for the right reason for the community in which you live. And by that you benefit, right? So that's the thing we found really kind of funny about that Stoicism had I don't know if do you know much about Epicureanism?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So they were very much like, okay, this is very stressful. We must retreat to the garden. We do not want to be perturbed by things because it's very important. Pleasure is the most important thing. And basically they tuck themselves away from other people's problems. And it's like a lot of what we call baby Stoics, like people who come to Stoicism but haven't really chewed the theory. Say some things like, it's beyond my control, therefore I shouldn't be worried about other people's problems. I need to make sure that I'm calm. That's Epicureanism.
Yeah.
That's you going, this is too stressful for me right now. And it might be too stressful for you right now. But in Stoicism, the idea is not to hide away, but to then build the blocks and put them in place so that it may be stressful today, but tomorrow it's not stressful because you've been able to grow and develop. So I'll give you a typical example someone gave me. I think we talked about this before again, with the oceans, as you're a swimmer. There's plastic in the oceans. So I had an argument with somebody, academically speaking, about the fact that they said the ocean is, yes, there's plastic, and yes, this is terrible, but it's beyond my control. They said, I can't do anything about the plastics. I don't know why you're so frustrated about the plastics. I don't know why you should be annoyed about the plastics. So I'm not annoyed about the plastics. I get frustrated, which is not particularly Stoic. I get frustrated when people say that there's nothing they can do. For example, if you drank out of a straw today, that plastic may well go into the ocean. So perhaps if you haven't got a reason, for example, if you're disabled, it's different. But if you're not disabled and you're not particularly young, you don't need necessarily a straw, right? There's other ways that you can drink your drink, or you can order a different drink. I've ordered other drinks that don't require straws, for example. You can talk to your friends about, is it enough to just throw litter in the right place, as in the bin? Is it not better to, not have a plastic bottle? Shouldn't we buy one that, shouldn't we buy a plastic bottle that is reusable? Because if I consistently throw away the water bottle instead of having something that I can use over and over again, I'm contributing to the plastic problem. Could I not do a degree eventually, if that's what I feel is my calling, so to speak, in engineering, and solve that problem that way? Can I not vote for politicians or local people or support, beach clear-ups, so that we can remove the plastic off the beaches? So that's the Stoic sort of response.
There's things you can do.
Exactly.
Why do you think they say there's nothing I can do?
Lack of imagination, Lee.
lack of imagination, or a lack of interest in that particular field, or a feeling I actually am helpless?
I think the lack of interest stems from a lack of imagination, because you say like, oh, I can't even imagine it. Oh, it's not for me. I do think some people do feel helpless. But I also would say that, do they feel the same way if they say, oh, I don't know how to do, let's say, oh, I don't know how to drive. Okay, so why don't you take lessons? Do they feel as helpless when it's something, I can't, for example, I can't drive. I don't know how to drive. But I know that if I wanted to learn to drive, I'd have to find money and time, and I'd have to go and, put myself in what would be an uncomfortable situation, because I like cycling.
Yeah.
But I've never driven. So I imagine if you gave me the keys to your car, that would worry me. So why would it worry me?
It would worry me too.
And rightly so. It would worry me and you, because I've never exposed myself to a situation where I've learned to drive, right? I literally do not know how to drive. So you and I would be like, Kai, do not get in the car, right? That would be a very sensible Stoic approach, right? And if I say, but Lee, I really want to learn, you say, okay, go and get some theory lessons and go and get some practical lessons. And, in 6 months' time, I'll let you drive, depending on what car you have, you might say, I'll let you drive my smaller car, or I'll let you drive we'll find a smaller car that you can, run around in. But you take it down into small bites, right? You wouldn't be like, okay, today, get in my car. Yeah, that would be really, really unfortunate and very sort of, lack of self-control, very unwise, very unjust, in the sense that I'm more likely to kill someone in that car, and you would also be responsible if you encouraged me to get in that car. So we say those things for like something that's, I think driving a car is actually quite difficult, if you think from someone who's never done it before.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot easier to go on a beach clean. So, I mean, you don't need a specific skill to do that. I think it's a mentality shift. For one, instead of saying, okay, what is it I can't do, you start asking yourself, what can I do? And Stoicism is about increasing one's agency, right? Yeah. Fundamentally, how can I do more? Not in terms of time, more stuff. No, but how can I do more of what I want to do? And what do I need to learn? And who do I need to meet in order to do that? I mean, I'm sure in Australia, you have to correct me, but I'm sure you often have beach cleaning operations, right?
No doubt, yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the beach cleanings, I mean, it's a great example, but I still wonder, like, if it doesn't come up in conversation, there's plastic in the ocean. Most people would know that that's an issue. Most people probably don't have the time of the day to give it a thought, unless it came up in conversation like you and I are having now, and then go, okay, well, there is plastic in the ocean. That's a good point, and maybe I can't do something about it. But actually, now listening to these two people talk, yeah, I probably could make sure I don't use plastic, moving forward, or reduce my plastic consumption and use. That's an easy step for doing something. But there's what about conflict overseas that is out of our hands, or is that not out of our hands? I mean, and should we be doing something about it, or should we not?
Depends on our role, right? So I actually just answered this very similar question when somebody was saying to me, I just written a piece on council culture at universities, with particularly mob-ruled council culture, where somebody says something somebody doesn't like, and then a whole mob comes down on them like a ton of bricks. And they're like, somebody said to me literally yesterday, but there are more important things to worry about in life. And they gave me the example of Yemen, the war in Yemen. I'm like, yes, I'm not going to disagree with you that council culture is less important than the war in Yemen, obviously. However, I'm an academic, right? This is my back garden. Yeah. And I have seen this in action. So people tell me council culture is not real. Only the right wing believe that, which is ironic, because historically speaking, the left wing perfectly knew well that the council culture existed, right? Ask anybody who didn't like what the church said 50 to 100 years ago, right? So they're like, it doesn't exist. But I've seen it with my own eyes. I have to shut my eyes if I'm going to deny that reality. So I do feel that in my role as an academic, I need to speak up against unjust counselling of people. I'm not saying that everybody being counselled is unjust. Obviously, some people really need to be counselled because they have been told many, many times and they just keep carrying on. But there's many people who are, just said the wrong thing, didn't really intend to say it in that way. Their tone was a bit off. They're particularly young or particularly old. They're not used to being called into account for those kind of things. And it was like, yeah, we need to be a bit more flexible. We need to find out what their intentions are. And we need to ask, is this the best way to do it? Now, that's not to deny that Yemen is more important, but do I speak Arabic, for example? No. Do I do I know anybody in Yemen that I could help? No. Now, then it's a case of that's what Stoicism would tell you, like, what is your role and what are your capabilities? So I think, for example, not being able to speak Arabic is quite a difficult thing to do if I want to help bring peace into the Yemen area, right? So it's also being realistic. I think you're absolutely right, Lee.
So if you have a role in society that uses plastic, and there's a problem with plastic in the oceans, which essentially includes everyone, then we all should have a role in doing our best part to keep it clean.
Exactly. So the only place I didn't really see plastic in my life recently was Bolivia. Yeah. Right. It just doesn't really exist. It's really strange, but good, but it doesn't really exist. And so, yeah, if somebody says to me, like, I don't live near a beach, well, yeah, then don't do a beach clean then. Right. But what do you do? Oh, like you said, I eat Subway or, McDonald's every week. And, now I've stopped eating McFlurries, or I've written to McDonald's. For example, I've recently seen McFlurry completely without the plastic top in Portugal for the first time ever. So obviously people are moving it forward, right? And say, okay, I won't go to this particular shop because I know that they will give me a coffee in a plastic cup. I'll go to a different cafe, which is a personal example in London. I really try hard to only go to cafes that are independent because they won't give me a plastic cup, right? So sometimes that's quite difficult, and in airport, almost impossible, right? So it's also about being realistic. Like, I'm in an airport, can I get? Well, I haven't been in an airport recently, but a year ago, I'm in an airport. What does this mean? Can I get a China cup? No. So
that brings us to a point about how far do we push ourselves beyond, because you say realistic, and I guess people that are so passionate about it might feel it very stressful, and it might actually do them worse for their health in a situation like at the airport where they just want to drink and there's nothing options other than plastic cups, let's say, and they put that pressure on themselves just to say, oh, I'm just going to refuse. I mean, is there a point where we have to go, look, actually, let's be kind on ourselves too? We have to do our best, but sometimes our best isn't as best as it could be, but outside of our control.
Yeah, I mean, I see it in terms of being wise rather than outside of your control, right? It's just like, being kind to yourself is actually wise, right? Yeah, giving yourself the ability to be like, if I had the option to have a China cup, would I do it? Yes, that's the intention. If you have no choice, you're not acting viciously because you didn't have a choice, right?
No.
If you have no choice, then doesn't say anything about your character. It's if you, for example, decided to go and get a coffee with a plastic, from a plastic cup because you couldn't be bothered to take the cup back to the waitress or the waiter, or you didn't want to pay $1.50 or $3 Australian, you wanted to pay two Australian dollars. That's when you start to say, well, that does say something about my character. Yeah. Right, because I'm saying I value my $1 Australian more than that plastic cup in the ocean, right? That's more important to me. So that's the kind of questions you start asking yourself, and that's
so it's right and wrong, good and bad, being integral. I guess having that level of integrity. This brings us back to a point you made earlier about being, acting or behaving in accordance with nature. And this is something that I have trouble to conceptualize, and maybe you can help me with this. But what does it mean by acting in accordance with nature? Like I had this example that I read through. It was one of the philosophers there, and it was about a guy that he basically had a struggling kid, and he was very upset because he couldn't do anything for his kid, and rather than being there for the kid, he just couldn't handle it, so he left. And his actions there is probably not in accordance with the nature, as far as leaving rather than staying there. Can you explain that for us a little bit?
Yeah, so living according to nature. In chapter 1 we talk about something, Leah and I have done it quite trivial to prove this point. So we talk about, should we drink cow's milk? Right, that is a question we dedicate a lot of time to in a page and a half, and we ask things like, well, how is the cow treated? Is the cow treated? Is it able to live according to its own nature? So is the cow, quite happy, in amongst the herd? Walking on grass, or is the cow locked up, separated from its calf, separated from the herd, and never seen daylight, right? So that's one key question. So the answer is, let's imagine the cow is particularly happy and and I know the cow personally. It's like, okay, should I drink the milk? Okay, well, is it my milk to drink, right? Is it mine, or is it, would it be, borrowing somebody's milk, or potentially stealing somebody's milk? No, it's my milk. It's been given to me. Okay, well then perhaps I should drink it, right? Because if the reason why I would not drink it is because it's unjust to the cow, well, I've got a perfectly good example where the cow's pretty happy. I'm stroking the cow. I know the cow quite well, right? I know that the farmer who looks after this particular cow is a particularly kind individual.
Yeah.
And then let's take a milk. I buy milk from a supermarket. Now I'm not sure where it comes from, so I do some analysis and find out the cow is probably not treated so well. Okay, so do I buy that milk? Probably not, if I value the ability to live according to nature, and the cow couldn't live according to nature. So maybe I say, okay, Lee, I'm not going to stock milk in my own fridge. But imagine I go to your house, right? And you give me a coffee and you put milk in it. Should I drink it then? Right? And then I ask myself the question, right? So would Lee get offended if I threw away the coffee? Would he take it as a personal insult to him? And would that ruin our friendship? And the answer, let's imagine that it would really upset you. Like, you would be like, oh my gosh, I made him, a Colombian coffee, and my friend gave me that coffee. I gave him my last, coffee beans from that packet, and I really wanted to extend our friendship, and he just threw it away. Let's imagine you were like that.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, that would be wrong of me if I know that you're like that, to be like, let's just throw it away, right?
Yep.
It might be better for me to drink that coffee, thank you, be very gracious to you and say, thank you very much. By the way, I don't often take milk in my coffee, but that was delightful.
Yep.
So the second time you give me a coffee, you don't put milk in it, or you put oat milk in it, right? And
yep.
I was gracious to you, you were gracious to me, and we've both worked, in terms of, virtue, because you've listened to me and you've gone, yeah, okay. You might say, well, why don't you take milk in your coffee? And we might have a really good conversation about what happens to the majority of cows in the Western world, where corporate farming, as opposed to individuals farming, produce milk. And you and I then might collectively decide that we're not going to drink milk, or we're only going to drink milk from an individual farmer that we know down the road. And that's actually much more virtuous, right, than me just throwing the coffee down the sink and not explaining my actions. The other thing that's important, and we talk about it in chapter 1 about the milk, is, do I like milk? Am I lactose intolerant? So that's why I said in the beginning.
There's a lot of questions here that you can ask. Now, if we came to the conclusion through some good argument or fact searching together that, essentially milk is not the best thing for the nature of the cow, and we could agree on that, but I still continue to drink milk, should I feel bad because I know now, or would I just avoid that and just say, you know what, maybe it's not true, maybe not all cows are unhappy?
Well, I mean, you can always be. I mean, if you know for
ignorance.
facts, right, you can always be in denial, right?
But is ignorance is an excuse? Like, it's still then we're really knowingly acting not in accordance with nature.
Ignorance is never a good excuse, right? Because it's a vice. So the opposite, and so you could be in ignorant, right? That's why I often say to Stoic leaning friends, "Oh, now that you know, you can't unknow that," and we laugh about that because it becomes true, right? It's not about beating yourself up about it, right? You might say, "But I really like milk, right? I just really, really like milk, and I just cannot give it up." And the Stoics might say, but no one said you should give it up. They just said that you shouldn't drink it from a commercial farm, right? So again, it's not saying that. Or they might say, okay, you really want to drink from commercial farms, then you should pressurize commercial farms to treat the cows better, right? So then that would enable you to drink that milk. Because we said, like, drinking milk or not drinking milk, it's not that Stoics drink milk and that non-Stoics don't drink milk. That's a very religious way of looking at it. The Stoics will look at all those questions and factor in what's the best response, depending on who they are, where they are, and if they like something. It's really that simple. And we proved that point by, in a different chapter, we talked about a yogurt, a cow yogurt factory, and how the CEO is treating his colleagues really, really well. And so we wanted to show that, yes, we don't drink milk, but we perfectly can use a great example of a CEO who shares his wealth with his workers as a great, upstanding person who happens to own a yogurt factory. And the irony was not lost on other people. They said that was really funny that we'd done that. It was like, that was the point we're making. It's not that the yogurt or milk is bad. It's not a vice nor a virtue. It's the discussion that one has based on the facts. So, for example, living according to nature, what is nature teaching us? So, for example, people say that climate change is bad. For example, I don't know if you've heard that. And in Stoicism, climate change is neither good nor bad. It depends. Why is it bad? Why is it good? So, let's imagine that humans' optimal operating temperature was like 1 degree higher. Then actually, global warming would be great, and we should be burning every fossil fuel on the planet, right? If we could optimize our performance as human beings, right? And that we saw that as the highest value, right? Okay, I'm not saying it should be, but let's imagine we thought it was. We all collectively agreed that everybody would be biologically better off if the temperature was 1 degree higher. Then we would have a moral case for burning more fossil fuels.
Yeah,
it's not the climate change per se that makes it bad or good. It's what it means. So if you have climate changes in global warming and it melts the glaciers and people in Bangladesh get flooded and they become refugees, and we don't want to house them, say, in the UK or Australia, we don't want them in there, but then that becomes a moral imperative, right, to do something. It's like, okay, if it floods, are you going to welcome them into London and Sydney and New York? And you don't mind that, so it's okay if Bangladesh floods, we just let it go into the ocean. That's what Stoics starts. That's why I said our book is not about giving you answers. We can't give you answers. We can only give you the questions that you can find your own answers. That, in my books at least, literally is the definition of self-help.
Yeah, and like where we started this, it's about questioning. I think that's where you start if you want to improve. So wherever you are in life, if you're feeling, not quite where you could be or wanting to be different, then the best place to start is questioning. And I guess that's where I started, as we discussed at the start of this conversation, was feeling a lack of fulfillment or void. And that's when I started questioning things. And when you start doing that, you'll find the little self-helps or the 7 steps to success and all those sort of things, which I think you can adapt. But it's really just helping you question things and giving you ideas and imaginations. And you know what? If that says reach higher and just try and stretch for that toilet paper, try that. If it doesn't really fit or work for you, then that'll at least put you in a direction of a practice.
Exactly.
And that's questioning.
Exactly. And we say that the quality of your life is marked by the quality of your questions. So I think a person who's having a very difficult life is asking things like, where do I get my next meal? And if you're in a slightly better position, not in terms of morally, but in terms of material wealth, then you're asking different questions like, should I buy organic food or should I buy fair trade food, right? So it is really key that, especially for in the moral sense, like instead of giving up, like we were saying earlier about the plastics, like, well, what can I do? What do I want to be able to do? Why is this important? And you might say, well, plastics in the ocean is not really my thing. I actually don't use a lot of plastic. Well, okay, that doesn't have to be, quote unquote, your thing, right? You just find whatever it is that you need to work on and work on it. The Stoics never said, everybody must work in this way and therefore that builds their character. No, everybody, I say often that everybody looks in the same direction to eudaimonia, like in terms of flourishing. We all want the happy life and we all look towards that direction. But Lee, your journey is different to mine. Your path may be steeper. The distance you need to cover may be longer, right?
Yeah.
It's not that Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius had exactly the same life. They had quite different lives. And it would be unfair to say that Epictetus' life was exactly the same or easier than Marcus Aurelius in any way, shape or form. But they both looked in the same direction. They both looked towards the life that is what Stoics would call a flourishing life, one that lived in accordance with nature. But the path was, sometimes it was steeper, sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was longer. Sometimes it was twisting and turning, and sometimes it's quite a straight path, right? Yeah. And I think that's the problem. If we take self-help and we don't adapt it, we sometimes think that if you do exactly what I say, you're going to have the same results. And if you're in Australia and I'm British, we won't have the same results, right? Because we come from 2 different countries and we have 2 different societies to navigate. And what Australians think about things is different to what British people think. And if you sell loads of books in Australia, you'll still only sell, 4 or 5 million? So, this is the kind of thing that we highlight in the book, being better. Being better is fundamentally asking yourself those questions. and asking yourself, what is it like to be in your own shoes, right? Not to be in somebody else's.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about hiding behind screens in this digital world that we're in and isolated, being in that way, perhaps that will sort of stop us from asking those questions because, actually, no, it won't stop us from asking the questions, but maybe we'll be looking even more externally for following other people's paths rather than our own, if that makes sense.
I think you're right. And that is the problem that I think we need to address as a society. Like,
it's always been a problem, yeah? Like, we've always looked externally and watched our neighbours and wanted to be like the Joneses.
Absolutely. I think it doesn't help though, because when you're in if you're in let's say a Zoom meeting and you're not a person who likes to speak up, right? It's quite hard for you to build your network and find out who you are based on how you operate around other people. It's much easier for you to sort of just keep quiet, right? It's much easier for you to be, in your own little world, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. But it is for example, it's much more difficult to get a promotion at work because if you're introverted, people don't necessarily know what you're up to because you don't scream about it. Like somebody who's more extroverted.
Can't see it.
And whereas you might brush past in the corridor, someone say, "Oh yeah, I can help you," and you do it in your quiet way, you get promoted in that way. That won't happen to you. So I am concerned on a sort of social level about people who aren't quite as extroverted or quite as apt at making what they do known to their colleagues. So I do think you're right that we are taking a lot of social cues of other people, and we may not be able to really do the inner work that you were doing with the journaling. And some people might, but I don't think necessarily that a 2D world helps you in the same way, unless you're used to thinking. So in my case, I think lockdown actually helped my thinking, but because I'm an academic, and so I do a lot of thinking in my own head, and was writing a book at the time. But I think that's a privileged life to lead in terms of the ability to think and get paid to think. And I don't know if other people have that privilege, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Mate, Being Better, good book, out on Amazon right now. What's the best place for people to get to you?
I would say Kai Whiting on Twitter if they like to keep it short. If they like to have a slightly longer conversation with me, stoickai.com. The only thing I ask people is actually not necessarily to buy the book, is to ask their local library for a copy, so that those people who have lost their job in lockdown don't have to feel the need to pay for the book, right? So if you could ask your local library for a copy of Being Better, Stoicism for a World Worth Living In, I think that would be a great thing to do for society, particularly those members who could do with a little bit of Stoicism in their life but can't really justify right now the money to pay for their own copy.
Yeah. Good call. I'll stick the website link in there and the book link as well, guys. So check it out at thehiddenwhy.com. Kai, thanks once again for an incredible conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee.
We'll talk again, I hope.
I certainly hope so.
Guys, check it out at thehiddenwhy.com. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon. Thanks, guys, for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you love what you're hearing. If you like this episode, guys, or any of the episodes that you're listening to here at The Hidden Why, please do me a favor by sharing it. You can share it with your families, you can share it with your loved ones. You can do that by using your favorite social media channels, using the icons on the platform that you're listening to The Hidden Why podcast. Also, guys, if you're a fan of the show, please connect with me. Connect with me at thehiddenwhy.com. I love to hear from you. I love to converse with the people that listen to this show to find out what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and perhaps if they have any questions or feedback for the show as well. You can stay up to date with all that I'm releasing here, guys. I do a solo show every Monday, a 3-minute thought every Thursday. I do 2 interviews a week on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and a book review every Friday. You can stay up to date with all that by subscribing to my newsletter at thehiddenwhy.com. Just enter your email address there, and also subscribing to the podcast on the platform that you choose to listen to your podcasts. You can also support the show, guys, by using the Amazon links at thehiddenwhy.com. So if you like books, you can get all the books that I review there. and anything else really that you like to purchase through Amazon. So use that link, it helps support the show. And we've also got a deal with Audible, guys. Audible is a fantastic way to listen to all your favorite books. We've got a deal with them so you can get 2 free books when you subscribe, or subscribe to a 30-day free trial. So check that out again at thehiddenwhy.com. Guys, that's it from me. You know what to do. Go out there, breathe more passion into every single moment. Do everything with greater purpose. And in doing so, you will discover your hidden why. This is The Hidden Why. My name is Lee Martinuzzi. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon.